Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hollywood writers and directors aren't supposed to like each other. And it's easy to discover the source of this animosity because they're the two schizophrenic halves of one movie-making soul. As Billy Wilder put it, without the director, a writer will never see his story brought to life. And without a writer who can present a story in cinematic terms, the director has no basic material with which to work. Now, in the best of all possible worlds, the relationship between writer and director would be symbiotic. But, stop the presses, Hollywood is not the best of all possible worlds. And so each craftsman tends to see the other as something of a parasite feeding on his own creative host. Back in the late 30s, when Billy Wilder was still only a screenwriter, only writing movies like Ninotchka and Midnight, he began to hang around a movie set to see what directing was like. One day he came back from a day's shooting and said to a friend, "They're stealing money. They're absolutely stealing money. I write the script, I tell them every move to make, and then they go down and make every move, and they're stealing money." Now, maybe when Wilder became a director as well as a writer, his opinion of the man behind the megaphone became a little more generous. We certainly know dozens of stories told by directors about how they had to write dialogue on the set. The dialogue was that bad. It would seem there are occupational hazards to the jobs. The director's jealousy that the writer has the first word, and the writer's envy that the director has the last. Still, there were occasional ceasefires, truces, non-aggression pacts, treaties between the nations of writer and director. Sometimes there was even a kind of unification. Too many playwrights and novelists and journalists would make the annual visit to Hollywood each winter for the money and the sunshine, and then return to New York in the spring with stories about how they were misused or not used at all. Other writers, less hardy or less pompous or maybe just less talented, went west to the shores of the Pacific and just kept on going. They sank into anonymity without a trace. It was a tough job for the East-West commuter, keeping your sense of balance, your sense of humor, your sense of the absurd, which to me are all the same thing. And if anyone managed this professional and emotional high-wire act, it was our guest this evening, Samson Raphaelson. Raphaelson has always considered himself, still does, a playwright who moonlighted in Hollywood. But this doesn't mean he put his brain on automatic pilot when he wrote movies, just that he brought a different kind of concentration to his film work. His plays were his own. He never, I believe, wrote plays in collaboration. His movies were written, in a sense, by talking out the plot, the characters, the dialogue, with a sympathetic spirit, and a stenographer with very good hearing. It was a very sociable way of licking the loneliness every writer feels when when his only company is a blank piece of paper. And what better company, what better collaborator, who could be a more sympathetic spirit than Ernst Lubitsch, with whom Raphaelson wrote 11 films. By the time these two men came together in 1930 or 31, the director was already famous for the Lubitsch touch. That's the suggestion, usually comic, that a garden of earthly or heavenly delights lay just the tiniest bit off screen, or behind a door that had been left just slightly ajar, or beneath the secret smiles of a beautiful woman and a dashing cavalier. This touch, and the sophisticated grace it presumes, is generally thought of as a directorial achievement, and so far as Lubitsch is concerned, I won't quibble. I'll simply mention that just about all of Lubitsch's famous silent films in Germany, such as Carmen, Madame du Barry, Anne Boleyn, and in the States, Rosita, Forbidden Paradise, The Marriage Circle, So This Is Paris, The Student Prince, The Patriot, were scripted by Hans Crawley. But I'm not getting into another arbitration meeting here. I have no reason to think Lubitsch's collaboration with Crawley was any less vigorous and influential than his collaboration with Samson Raphaelson, or for that matter, than his work with Charles Brackett and Billy Wilder. Here's how they described the collaborative process. They said, to write for Ernst Lubitsch was an education, a stimulus, a privilege, but it was no cinch. Though he never took credit, he was a writer too in the full intimacy of collaboration. One had to understand the kind of stylized film he wanted to make and supply it with material. And always he was there saying, is this the best we can do? Does it ring the bell? When it's right, it rings the bell. And Brackett and Wilder go on in loving detail, describing the pirouettes and entreshots that Lubitsch's mind could make during a story conference. It's telling, I think, that this tribute, and other tributes from Lubitsch collaborators, appeared in a magazine called The Screenwriter in 1948. Here was one director even a disgruntled writer could respect and love, a managing editor for their comic talents, a conductor of the music and light and word and innuendo that went from the page to the screen under the Lubitsch touch. When Lubitsch and Raphaelson worked together, the bell almost always rang out. It was a feature-length Angelus. It's appropriate, I think, that so many of their films deal with the theme, style is substance. Manners are what matter, because of the extraordinarily compatible working relationship they had. These two friends would get together, talk, laugh, argue, cajole each other, and out would come a movie like The Smiling Lieutenant, or The Merry Widow, or Angel, or The Shop Around the Corner, or the film you'll be seeing later this evening, Heaven Can Wait. Samson Raphaelson never wrote what we call technically an original screenplay for Lubitsch, which is to say all his scripts were based, technically, on plays and operettas. But no screenplays could have been more original, in fact, as well as in tone. Trouble in Paradise had its origins in a Hungarian play by one Laszlo Aladar. Angel was based on a play by another Hungarian, Melchior Lengel. The Shop Around the Corner, a third Hungarian, Nicholas Laszlo. Heaven Can Wait, a fourth Hungarian, Ladislaus Bus-Fekete. Now, either Raphaelson was a closet Magyar with a fluency in Hungarian, or he relied only lightly on these plays. In fact, he's told us, he never read any of them. They were chosen for some strand of a story idea, some appealing plot twist, or compelling minor character, perhaps just a setting. In a few minutes, we'll look at Heaven Can Wait, but I don't want to spoil the film for you by talking it out. And if you've seen it before, it won't disappoint you on second or third look, because this is comedy not of surprise, but of recognition. Recognition that we are all pretty funny in the way we look at life and love. In fact, the whole appeal and frustration of these lovely films for a critic is that it's exactly what makes them so delicious, so deft, as light as soufflés, and as deep as the glow in the eyes of a Miriam Hopkins or a Gene Tierney, that makes them almost impossible to parse. And I guess that's a good thing. It's said that poetry is what gets lost in translation. What gets lost in film criticism are the nuances and the aura, the warmth and the wit of the Lubitsch touch, and the Raphaelson touch too. Thank you. Samson Raphaelson wrote what was maybe the wittiest movie dialogue ever to emerge from real people. So it's appropriate that he should have, indirectly, started off the whole talking picture era with a play he wrote in 1925 called The Jazz Singer. The play was, I'm told, made into a movie, though Raphaelson had nothing to do with the film's script or with the decision to record a few songs and a few lines of dialogue on records that would be played in sync with the film's images. So Rafe, as three generations of admirers refer to him, would be happy to say, as far as his contribution to this particular bit of film history goes, you ain't heard nothing yet. Fortunately for all of us, we've heard quite a bit since. In his films, of course, with Lubitsch, with Hitchcock, that's Suspicion, working on the Harvey Girls and a number of other pictures. In his plays, Accent on Youth, Skylark, The Perfect Marriage, Hilda Crane, all of which were made into films. In his short stories for the major markets of the time, and lately in his teaching and in his own unique brand of film criticism that appears in American Film and Film Comment. There's a line from the scene we watched in Trouble of Paradise in which Herbert Marshall muses offhandedly to the waiter about his assignation for the evening. He says, if Casanova suddenly turned out to be Romeo, having supper with Juliet, who might become Cleopatra, well, if James Agee suddenly turned out to be Oscar Wilde, having supper with Alexander Walcott, who might become Ernst Lubitsch, then together they might approximate what Samson Raphaelson has meant to Broadway, to Publishers Row, in the groves of Academe, and to Hollywood. When Francois Truffaut came into town recently with his charming new film, The Man Who Loved Women, my friend John Hughes asked him about the strong similarities between his movie and Heaven Can Wait, right down to a serene death scene at the end of the Truffaut film, which is virtually a quotation from Heaven Can Wait. According to John, Truffaut blushed a bit, discovered at last, as if he seemed to say, and said only, "Ah, Lubitsch." Well, I'm sorry Truffaut isn't here tonight, because I guess after seeing and hearing tonight's guest in all his charm and wit and octogenarian sex appeal, Truffaut might blush and say, "Ah, Raphaelson." Please welcome Samson Raphaelson.
Thank you. I've got an ear raid here, which if it's not handled right, squeaks a little. It has what's called acoustic feedback. Now it's all right.
So what do you think of this movie we just saw, Heaven Can Wait?
Well, my wife liked it very much, and I saw it about 2 years ago, and before that I hadn't seen it for about 30 years, I guess, and I liked it when I saw it up to a certain point. And tonight I liked it about 7 or 8 minutes past that point. But I just got a little tired of the variations on lechery that are in there. But my wife, who is, I would say offhand, less lecherous than I am, seemed to like it all the way through. But Lubitsch and I, there was a kind of difference between us on lip smacking about certain things and at certain times. And I think that basic difference was he was a Berlin kid and I was basically shaped by the Midwest, although I was born in New York. And I wasn't going to do this picture at first because when he gave me a notion of what he expected, he was looking forward with great glee to this 13-year-old boy being seduced by a pretty lusty 18-year-old servant maid. No French girl was in either of our mind. And I said, I thought that could be interesting, but I didn't see too much fun in it on the screen for the United States of America in whatever year it was, 1930, 1940, whatever it was. And it kind of bored me. I didn't see how to make it interesting. I didn't care too much for the 18-year-old girl, theoretically. I didn't care too much for the 13-year-old boy or for how he felt about her or how she felt about him. I could see a tragic or a sad or... but we were horsing around a little bit, and I think it was I that got the idea of the French girl. I like to believe it was I anyway. I really can't remember. But where certain things sound as if they were my idea, and certain things sound as if they were Lubitsch's. And once the concept of this is 1889 and not 1888, and you don't have to marry a girl and you kiss her, once that came into the picture, the whole style, then I loved the idea, and the whole style of the picture took on vitality. But for instance, when this was a chronic difference of opinion between him and me, and as we worked together, we had more and more respect for each other. We were both growing up. He was only about 6, 7, 8 years older than I was. And we had a tacit understanding that if one of us objected to something, it wouldn't be. We'd work on it until we both liked it. So I must have liked the last part of this, but still I feel, for instance, when he goes to that blonde, you know, and with a little bit of theatrical ingenuity, we discover he isn't really out there to get her, but he's out to salvage his son. I don't remember, but I'll bet that I said, oh God, haven't we had enough of this, these variations on the theme? Let's have something else. And let's open it up and either make him a real horny old bastard, you know, and have something hot and alive and sexy and authentic. Or let's introduce other elements of character into this thing. Let's not make, he's a pretty boring old coot by now. I mean, I'd like to hear his opinion on something, you know. Now, I don't know whether I said that or felt it at the time. I must have agreed. I know I wasn't following along slavishly. I never had that sort of relationship with Lubitsch. But I don't agree now. I just said, oh, come on, you know, let's get somewhere beyond the next chick that comes into his life. And I said, make up your mind about your wife, too, you know. I mean, let's hear a little more bells ringing about her. Hearing it tonight when he's talking to the devil, I said, huh? You know, the devil tells him he's going to meet some nice dames up there who liked him, and then the devil tells him his grandpa, and last he mentions that wife. I don't know what was the matter with Lubitsch or me, you know, to find that, to have that lack of grace in the moment when a man is dead and ought to have a little dignity. But I guess I am as responsible as anyone, because if I had objected to it, I'm sure the point would have been recognized by Lubitsch, and he never did anything behind my back, as most directors or many directors would freely do. I don't mean behind my back, but behind the author's back. I don't remember what we started to say.
You said it.
Okay.
We described, and people know, your working relationship with Lubitsch, pretty much. I wonder if you'd care to talk for a little bit about your working relationship with Alfred Hitchcock on Suspicion.
Well, there's not much, really, of too much interest. I only worked on that one picture with him, and I have heard that authors had difficulties working. Is that true? Authors had had a hard time with Hitchcock?
I would know. I've heard stories, but
I dimly have heard it, and I had no trouble at all. I never had it so easy for some reason, because in the first place, the book it was based on had more substance. The book called Before the Fact had more substance than anything I had ever worked on, because all the other things that I recall that I worked on, I never even read the original. And Lubitsch always would tell me the meagerest outline because he didn't want me to be influenced, except to say that it was, I hope there aren't too many Hungarians here, but he was saying typical lousy Hungarian play, you see. And I will call anybody a liar if I'm quoted saying that, because some of my best friends are Hungarian. But suspicion did have body. I did invent, I don't think anybody would find any of the dialogue in the screenplay, in the book. But Hitch had some kind of an outline. I only met him then. I didn't know him before. And I read the outline about halfway through. It had been worked on halfway through. And it seemed pedestrian and routine to me. And I said, why don't you let me start without an outline and let me bring you scene 1 or 2 and then see how we get along. And he said, fine. And I brought him the opening scene, which is not the opening scene, by the way, the only one that was changed. But it was in a railroad compartment. And I remember, same home where he's living now, I arrive at 5 and he was behind the bar shaking orange juice and gin, and I never drank so much gin in my life as I did during that job. And he stand behind the bar and have you got it? And I thought, well, he'd read it overnight or something. I said, sure. He said, well, let's have it. I'd have, say, 7 pages. And he stood there and glanced at him, and he reads very rapidly, while I was beginning to drink. And he looked up and said, it's fine, Rafe, and we talked about something else. And that was it. That was how it went for the whole picture, and I couldn't believe it. There was no... Now, this picture is not a typical Hitchcock picture, either, because you find very few, there's nobody climbs the nose of some mountain crag to push somebody else off, and there's nobody all alone out in an open field with an airplane trying to mow him down. There's no carousel in it. It's a straight story about people. We were stuck at the end. The end of the book was that the girl loves him so much that knowing he is going to kill her for her money, and knowing that there's poison in the glass of milk, she drinks it out of love. That's the book. That, for some weird reason, was censorable. I suppose the censors were afraid that the women of America would be encouraged, to let the men of America poison them. You couldn't do that.
Did you work on films with other directors as closely, on the scripts of films, as closely as you did with Lubitsch? Was there any director you collaborated on in that sense, really on the script?
I never worked as closely with anyone as I did with Lubitsch. We were utterly unlike in background and physically, but the minute we met, our minds met. I think I could almost quote, I think I could invent dialogue for Lubitsch in almost any situation, as he would, or invent how he would attack it. Pleasing him wasn't enslaving yourself, for me. because he was a man whose mind I understood, and it was lots of fun thinking up stuff that that guy would like. You see, it wasn't doing it the boss's way so much. Not that I would like it. I would never have written any play of my own. I would never have written any of that material as a play of my own. Good, though. I'm not talking about quality, but I'm talking about the kind of thing. And I, looking at that marvelous face, I suddenly think of something that I knew it would delight him, you see. And that was fun. And when it would, as I grew to know him better, would begin to have the fun of developing it. Now, I don't mean that I did all the work. Believe me, he was a creative man. But that's how I remember being with him, and that was an extraordinarily rare relationship for Hollywood, and I was very lucky because most of my time in Hollywood was on his pictures.
Rafe, when you came to Hollywood, was it specifically to work on a Lubitsch film, or was it, there was another film, Boudoir Diplomat? Mel St. Clair was the director, I think.
I wrote that before I knew Lubitsch.
Mm-hmm.
It was very amusing because it was a Lubitsch kind of picture. It was, in fact, basically the same material as Smiling Lieutenant, about a man. It was a New York play, I think, and I was asked to do some work on it. And old man Laemmle, Carl Laemmle, who owned Universal, wanted to make another Irving Thalberg out of his son, Carl Laemmle Jr. Irving Thalberg having been old man Laemmle's secretary and then gone over and become Irving Thalberg. And Laemmle thought, in some vague way, I guess, that if this guy that was my secretary can do it, my son, for God's sake. And so Carl Laemmle Jr., who was a very nice guy, but didn't really, I guess, didn't really have the necessary qualities, was running the studio. And two people there were relatives of the Laemmle's cousins, William Wyler and his brother Bob Wyler, and they were only there because they were cousins. Old man Laemmle and Carl Jr. didn't have the faintest idea that Willie had any talent. They were just tolerating them. And I met the two, and we got along, and they had this assignment, as I recall it. Can't be anything else, it must be that. And I wrote it to the satisfaction. Bob was the producer. Willie was the director. And I wrote, all three of us liked it. And young Laemmle, all by himself, wouldn't know whether anything was good or bad. You know, he could read it, but... And since we were all three unknowns, he decided to play safe, and he gave it to a known writer by the name of Benjamin Glaser, who had been very successful in the silent days. Then I think he gave it to Mel St. Clair, and Barney Glaser wrote the script, and it stood out as one of the worst scripts of the decade. One of the worst, pictures of the decade. They made it.
Maybe it was...
I don't say that mine wouldn't have been equally bad. I was saved that test.
Maybe it was because Barney Glaser, the one thing I know about him was his law of good and evil in movies. He said, if a fellow comes in and pets a dog, he's the hero. If he kicks him, he's the villain.
If the fellow does what?
If he pets the dog, he's the hero. If he kicks him, he's the villain.
That's very nice.
So, but he may have reduced your script to exactly those terms.
Yeah, I'm sure. I remember at the time seeing something that he had written, and in my arrogance and youth and vanity thought it was no good. I was terribly patronizing to Hollywood. I wouldn't have been, if I knew what I knew now, I would have found places and values and things to do. But it was the intellectual style to be patronizing to Hollywood, and without realizing it, I was following the style. Without realizing it, I was a snob. I would have been shocked if anyone had said that. You didn't go to Hollywood unless you were broke. And writing there was like, well, as a few years before, writing soap opera for radio would be for a high-toned fellow who thought of himself as a stage playwright. You see? And that's what was the attitude. But when I met Lubitsch, all that changed, because you couldn't help respect that man. And when I saw the Love Parade, I went mad about it. I had never seen anything like it. I hadn't seen too many movies, because the movies I saw were almost always not enchanting to me. And this one delighted me. It's the only movie I ever saw twice in my life at that time.
I understand you were not enchanted with the film made of the jazz singer.
No, the jazz singer is something I have to live, what's the word, outlive or...
Live down, perhaps.
Huh?
Live down.
Live down. That's it. I wrote it, I was young, and I thought, and this obvious, irresistible, corny idea came to me, you see, and I didn't have the character or the taste to resist it. I mean, I just thought of one Sacco scene after another. It was my first play, and I didn't know that you could, having thought of a thing like that if you worked on it, you could get some depth into it. You could get some character. I didn't get any depth, any character, or anything else. I just got biff, bang, bing, Sacco, and enjoyed it. But I had a modicum of taste, I would like to think, and when I saw that thing on the screen, I would never in a million years have had Joslyn singing Mammy from the stage and big close shots on his mother with a marvelous Second Avenue Yiddish lovable mama face looking up at him adoringly while he's singing Mammy. I would rather have committed Harry Carey than write such horrible scenes. And I've been trying to live it down. You know, I would like to take out ads, you know, saying and write that bloody, I mean, nothing as awful as that is in the original stage play.
We could go on talking all night, but I'd like to leave a little time for a question or two from the audience. Yes.
Time Heaven Can Wait was made, it was not uncommon for several Hollywood films to cover characters from youth and old age, and yet in the last, say, decade, it's very uncommon. You might find a little big man or a popular every couple of years. Do you think there was a turning point in Hollywood when that type of ambitious film could no longer be written and made?
Okay, I'll repeat the question for the rest of you and for Rafe. He said that the structure of Heaven Can Wait accommodates, I think, 8 or 10 periods in the life of one person, from his birth to his death. And it occurred to him that there were several other examples of that kind of structure in films of the time, though at the moment I can't think of one.
Well, I wouldn't know. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a historian. And nor do I have a good memory for the films I've seen, because I never went to see them in order to remember them. I went to see them in order, I suppose if I had to say why, I would say in order to experience them. And whatever effect they had on me was in me somewhere, just like you read a book, it has an effect on you, even though you don't remember the plot. So I hardly remember the plot of anything I read. And I certainly am not the person, you know, that you ideally go to for an answer to your question.
No, the question was, do you think that type of film could be made today?
Do you think that type of film could be made today?
Well, if it were interesting, it could be.
Yes.
It all depends on how it's handled. I think any type of film could be made today. I don't know. I don't know how you can be prejudiced against the type, you know, of film.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, knowing what you know now, how would you do it all over again, starting in 1977?
This is this particular film, or?
No, your career.
Okay. Knowing what you know now, and that's a lot. How would you do it if you had to do it all over again, if you were starting today, presumably as a writer? What would your attitude be toward movies?
Oh, very respectful, extremely respectful. I would seek, I would have a very great problem, because my opinion would be that to be fully creative in movies, you should be a director. On the other hand, to be fully creative in the theater, you can be a playwright. The director doesn't take away from what you have created in the theater. And as I once said, I was pitching for immortality, nothing less. And at that time, I was pitching for immortality via the theater. Now, if I had any notion that there was a future in movies, that anybody would be seeing old movies, I didn't. Lubitsch didn't. Then I would have to decide, do I want to be a director? Or maybe produce a writer. But I would want real control over what I was writing, and I would shape a lot of the material that I shaped for the theater in terms of movies. And I certainly would not have sold Jazz Singer, Skylark, Perfect Marriage, Hilda Crane. Those are 4 plays of mine that I sold to movies, utterly, an accent on youth, utterly indifferent about what they were going to do to it, because I think who's going to remember a movie? And my plays are what will last. I would never have sold those plays without control on the movies that were made, because the lousy movies were made on all 5 of them, in my opinion.
Mr. Raphaelson, when you were establishing the character of Mariette Collet in Trouble in Paradise, were you working toward the definition of a certain sort of woman, and do you think that Kay Francis executed your theory and your approach at all? There seems to be a darker dimension in the woman, particularly in the fade-out, left with nothing, having given the pearls away, having been pleased at the end of the film. It seems to be a very frothy comedy, but yet it seems to have another dimension. The film itself, a comedy of morals, really. No one gets what he's wanted, and everyone's left with nothing.
Okay.
I had no intention except to write one good scene after another. I had no intention, as intentions are described in books on the technique of writing, or books that talk about theme, or line or motif or atmosphere. We were just writing that story. And I can't tell you what I had in mind about Kay Francis. I just wrote each scene as it came along, and I hoped it was good.
About the character of Mariette Collet, and then how she took it and executed whatever you might have.
Were you pleased with what she did with the
I
character?
loved it. I was crazy about her performance. I liked her performance much more than Marshall's. I thought he was a little bit of a stuffed shirt, but I thought she and Miriam were wonderful. And I think she wasn't appreciated enough. I don't think she had, in her day, she had the status that the woman I saw on the screen recently when I saw this thing should have had. I thought she gave a superb performance.
Yes, gentleman back.
Were the number of door opening and closings in the scripts that you worked on with Lubitsch, were those something that you were consciously striving for? Were they in the scripts that you wrote, or were they something that Lubitsch added as part of the direction?
Okay. When you were working on scripts with Lubitsch, did you have a ration of door scenes, of scenes involving doors? Doors left slightly open, doors closed, people walking into doors.
No.
Library doors.
And I don't think Lubitsch ever sat down, and said, I will do variation number 68 on my door trick. If you write at all for actors, and I've written a good deal my own plays and directed some of them, there's always a point where the actor has to go out. Or usually, and if he goes out, 900 times out of 901, he goes through a door. And in that moment of going out, that moment has a rhythm. That moment, if you have any experience as a craftsman, I'm talking theater now, if you have the cunning of an artist, then you know that moment when he goes out, he just doesn't go out and shut the door. There's a moment in which something can be said, and you also know that rhythmically, that what he says in that moment is going to be heard, is going to score vastly more than what he says at some other time, and there are times in a play when things are said that are not remembered in the trough of the wave. So usually, if you're any good, something happens in the doorway. Now, of course, with movies, a lot more can happen, because implications are done by letting the imagination operate on what happens behind a wall, let us say. Well, a wall often becomes a door, because a wall that you can move into and out of is a door. But in terms of a door specifically, that made a sentence for somebody who was looking for something to write.
Rafe, we talked this evening about the perhaps natural animosity that one would find between writers and directors, and the feeling among writers that they were second-class citizens in Hollywood. That they were second-class citizens in Hollywood. Did you feel this way, and do you think, from your observations, that it's still true today?
It's a good deal of it is true, yes. I was lucky with Lubitsch. Lubitsch had genuine respect for a writer, and a lot of directors in Hollywood then, and I suspect now, are afraid of meeting their equal in a writer. That is, meeting a writer who is as good a writer as they are a director. There's a fear, just as anybody with any ego at all, and I say ego as a thing acceptable in my social circles, not disparagingly. Any writer with any ego at all, any person, feels a little less if somebody else says something more vividly, more aptly, more wittily that he would like to have said. And there's no getting away from dialogue in pictures. And I have felt that in various contacts I had at that time and since. The director would love to be twice as witty without words. And some of these brilliant directors really kill themselves trying to do that, and sometimes they succeed. And when they succeed, they're off on a whole 10-year spree, you know, of doing it badly and worse because they did it once. But what they fail to realize is that if they got a director as good, a writer as good as they are, or better, that they still would have the great prestige of being the picture maker. Lubitsch knew that. Lubitsch was wonderfully generous in his attitude toward me in these matters. And he was never afraid that I would dim his glory. And I took it for granted that I would get no credit whatsoever except on the screen or wherever it was given, because I was there for money. I was writing my plays for my immortality came through another door, if it was going to come at all. I never dreamt I'd be here because I wrote films. Never occurred to me.
Okay, just one more question. Yes, the gentleman over on the side.
I was wondering if there was, what was the special attraction, if any, to the Hungarian theater or play? You mentioned several properties before, and I know that Dietli's Jewel Robbery, which is based on a Hungarian play. There seems to be a certain trend in the 30s. So what was the attraction, if any?
Okay, Rafe, do you know what this mysterious connection was between the Hungarian stage and the Hollywood film in the 30s? It was not only Lubitsch who was finding not gems necessarily, but rhinestones that you could polish into gems into movies. Who were these playwrights? Did you ever read any of these plays?
Well, there's a lot of Hungarians who escaped from oppression, from the coming fear of Hitler. They felt it in Budapest, and Budapest was a marvelously live theatrical city. I wish to God I had been there. It was a city of the sidewalk cafes. It was a city where Molnar and God knows who else would sit at cafes and write their plays. And the theater loving was so great in Budapest that you could write the lousiest play in the world and enchant those marvelous Hungarians who brought enough talent into the theater to make up for the talent that was lacking on the stage. A Hungarian is a word for marvelously susceptible and a marvelously gifted, special kind of person. And we always thought of a Hungarian play as a play with an idea. Somebody once wrote a sign up on the hall at Metro saying it's not enough to be a Hungarian, you have to have a second and third act too. But that first act usually had something that attracted Lubitsch. And we always had, when we got together, we just knew that we could do something with it. But that's all I know about the Hungarians. I had met Bus-Fekete once, and I forget. That's the only one I remember, but I think I've met several of them. They were very nice, charming people. We made a joke in That Lady in Ermine, and nobody laughed, but Lubitsch and I thought it was funny. There was this castle, back in medieval days, or whenever it was, 18th, 19th century, imaginary castle, imaginary country, and it was country was invaded by the enemy, and the Count had to flee, and he left the Countess, who was the heroine, Betty Grable, I think, I forget who it was, behind, because the enemy was going to occupy the castle, and the conquering enemies were Hungarians. And I remember we had this line saying, now you got to be very careful, be very courteous, and be sure never to call a Hungarian, you see. And Lubitsch and I thought that would just have them rolling on the floor. But they didn't understand it. No audience laughed. It's our special feeling about Hungarians.
Rafe, I'm sorry you never directed a film. I said, I'm sorry you never directed a film. We saw tonight that you certainly know how to write a film, and we've learned tonight that you could have been a star performer if you had ever wanted to go on the stage or screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.